Hey guys, tonight we take a walk through ancient Rome, not through its blood-soaked arenas or grand battles, but into a quieter kind of chaos. The kind where old men in flowing togas grumble at each other over turnips. You're there standing in the early light of a Roman morning. The sun's just starting to stretch over the tiled rooftops, throwing golden spears of warmth across crumbling stone columns. Birds chirp like they've already heard the gossip. And the Forum, Rome's beating political heart, is beginning to stir. Robes rustle, sandals slap gently against stone, senators file in, eyes puffy, breath steaming. You catch snippets of conversation. Not war, not tax reform, not scandal, but something about vegetables. Turnips, to be exact. Yes, turnips. You probably won't survive this meeting if you expect thrilling gladiator duels. But if you're here for whispery drama, political snubs, and people pretending to be noble while secretly arguing over root vegetables, well, you're in for something oddly perfect. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit near the edge of the Curia Julia, the Senate House, on one of the public benches. You're dressed like an apprentice scribe. Your wax tablet rests on your lap, stylus ready. You're not here to change history, just to witness it. And today it starts with Senator Flavius. He's old, loud, and deeply committed to the preservation of what he calls traditional Roman values, which today seem to include making sure no one overpays for turnips. Have we really come to this? He bellows, arms raised dramatically, where the populus Romanus, the Roman people, must suffer the insult of inflated tubers. There are snorts. One senator drops his stylus. Another coughs suspiciously into his toga. You try to keep a straight face. Flavius, however, isn't joking. Last week, he continues pacing. Now I sent a servant to the market in the Subura. For 2 turnips, he paid the sum of 1 denarius. 1 whole denarius, that gets a reaction. Murmurs ripple like wind through reeds. A denarius is what a laborer earns in a day. For 2 turnips, outrageous. Or maybe just supply and demand. A younger senator named Petronius clears his throat. With respect, Flavius, it's winter. The yield is poor. Transport's been delayed, Flavius interrupts with a dramatic flourish. Excuses from the young and soft-bellied? In my day, turnips were abundant and reasonably priced. Rome did not rise on excuses. You scribble this down, resisting the urge to doodle a turnip in the margins. But the thing is, this isn't just about vegetables. Beneath the humor is a real question. How does Rome, a sprawling empire feeding millions, keep its people fed without collapsing under its own logistics? Food in Rome wasn't just a necessity. It was a symbol, a battleground, a weapon, and sometimes a scapegoat. The daily grain dole, the annona, was the cornerstone of keeping the poor from rioting. But turnips weren't included in the ration. They were supplemental, optional, and therefore vulnerable to price hikes. Historians still argue whether this particular turnip tantrum actually occurred as written in Flavius' preserved notes, or if it was exaggerated by later scribes trying to highlight Rome's descent into pettiness before the empire crumbled. But records from around 40 BCE do show fluctuations in vegetable pricing being discussed in local market forums, and there's evidence of minor protests related to overpriced goods in common stalls. Back in the Senate, the debate shifts tone. Senator Aurelia, one of the few female landowners to be granted senatorial voice during this brief experimental period under Gaius Julius Caesar, raises her hand. "Are we forgetting the farmers?" she asks. If the market charges more, perhaps the farmers are finally getting paid. Fairly Flavius looks scandalized, like she just advocated for letting slaves vote. The market, he says coldly, is not for enrichment. It is for order. If the poor must pay more, they will take more, and they will take it from us. You glance around. Some nod. Others glare. One guy's definitely asleep. Outside, carts rattle past on cobbled streets. Bakers open shop. Pigeons loiter hoping for crumbs. You wonder how many of those passing Romans are aware that inside these walls, the empire's finest minds are arguing about turnip prices. But that's the thing about Rome. It's both grand and ridiculous, brutal and bureaucratic, and its greatness rests just as much on its laws as on its legumes. Senator Flavius, still flushed with indignation, is pacing the mosaic floor like a man personally betrayed by agriculture. You watch him from your corner perch, stylus ready. The way he mutters to himself between speeches reminds you of your uncle after a bad dice game. First it's turnips, he grumbles, then it'll be leeks, and next thing you know, chaos. He gestures to a wax tablet held by his aide. I've had scribes tally vegetable prices for the past 6 months. 6 months. And you know what I found? He doesn't wait for a reply. Turnips are up 38%. That's more than garum garum. A gasp! Garum, the fermented fish sauce of the gods, was sacred, but turnips. How dare they? The other senators begin murmuring again, some feigning concern, others trying not to roll their eyes. But Flavius is right about one thing. Food prices were deeply political. In Rome, they always had been. You watch Senator Cassianus rise slowly, as if physically burdened by the stupidity of the conversation. With respect, he begins, "We are the Senate of Rome. Surely our time is better spent discussing military levies, aqueduct maintenance than food." Flavius cuts in. Tell that to the plebs when they can't afford dinner. It's a fair point, though, delivered with the subtlety of a runaway chariot. Why were Roman senators arguing over turnip prices in the first place? Well, for starters, Roman citizens were famously opinionated about food. And vegetables weren't just background noise to the main course. They were status indicators, health symbols, and sometimes surprisingly political tools. The turnip, for instance, had a reputation. It was considered both common and curiously respectable. It grew easily. It stored well. Some believed it was good for the spleen. Others just liked it roasted with honey. But Flavius's real issue, it wasn't just about turnips being expensive. It was about losing control. In a city where bread was subsidized and meat was reserved for feast days or upper-class bellies, vegetables were one of the few items that floated freely through the economic system. And when something floats freely, it can drift into dangerous waters. See, Rome operated on a delicate balancing act. The poor, especially the urban poor, were volatile. Keep them fed, and they stayed passive. Let food get scarce or expensive, and the riots started fast and ended with smashed shopfronts, looted villas, and occasionally the public stoning of a merchant or two. Historians still debate whether these food riots were coordinated protests or simply mass tantrums, but there's no denying their impact. Emperors fell, or at least panicked, when the food supply was threatened. So while it might seem hilarious that grown men in fine linen are shouting about tubers, you begin to realize this is about survival. Their own and the city's. Senator Varro, a quieter man with ink-stained fingers and a reputation for owning half the vegetable farms outside Capua, speaks next. His voice is mild, but his words are razor-sharp. Perhaps the issue is not the price, he says, but who controls the supply chain. Everyone perks up. That phrase, supply chain, is as ancient as Rome itself, and always controversial. You think of the ox carts that rumble down the Via Appia, the farmers who grow their goods under crushing tax quotas, the middlemen who store the food in creaky wooden granaries, and finally the vendors in the forum who mark up prices by whim or weather. Control the chain, and you control the plates of Rome. Varro continues. We can regulate prices all we want, but unless we invest in transportation storage and labor protections, we're just slapping wax on a cracked amphora. It's surprisingly progressive for a man who once declared that goats were better than children. Senator Petronius leans in with a smirk. And would that investment come from your estate's taxes? Varro. There are snickers. Varro smiles thinly. Let's not pretend we all don't own farms. And just like that, the floor shifts. This isn't about turnips anymore. It's about profit. See, many senators owned agricultural estates latifundia worked by slaves or poor laborers. They produced grain grapes, olives, and yes, in vegetables. Some even sold directly to urban markets bypassing middlemen. So a rise in prices could mean more coin in their own pockets, but to publicly support that bad optics. So here they are arguing on the surface about feeding Rome while quietly calculating their own margins. The irony doesn't escape you. Outside, the bells ring from the Temple of Saturn. Noon is near. The scent of roasting chickpeas wafts in from a vendor. Your stomach grumbles, probably because you skipped breakfast. Turnips don't sound so bad anymore. Inside, the debate rages on. One senator proposes state-controlled vegetable gardens. Another wants to ban price speculation. A third suggests simply ignoring the issue until it solves itself. That one gets booed. Through it all, Flavius stands tall, practically vibrating with passion. We must act now, he says, thumping his fist on a marble bench. Today it's turnips, tomorrow it's cabbage, and then, what chaos. You try not to laugh, but he's not entirely wrong, because in Rome, where every loaf of bread and every sack of lentils was a thread in the social fabric, even turnips had weight. Even turnips could unravel the empire. You don't expect vegetables to carry this much drama, but here you are watching the Roman Senate gradually turn into what feels suspiciously like a vegetable market. Senator Flavius, now red-faced and fueled by righteous starch-based fury, has finally sat down, but not before loudly declaring that anyone who disagrees with him probably eats parsnips like a barbarian. This sparks a fresh ripple of murmurs and the muffled laughter of a younger scribe 2 rows down from you. You note it all silently. Stylus tapping lightly on your wax tablet. So why exactly do vegetables matter so much in ancient Rome? Well, to start, food wasn't just about nutrition here. It was about class culture and control. And in the hierarchy of ancient edibles, vegetables had a strange role simultaneously, humble and powerful. You walk with your thoughts into the open-air stalls that line the Roman streets. Picture it now, bundles of leafy greens wilting gently in woven baskets, garlic braids swinging like lazy pendulums. And yes, crates of slightly bruised but proudly displayed turnips, dusty chalk white and squat like tiny amphoras. You overhear a vendor shouting, "Turnips fit for gods," and goats alike. Turnips were incredibly versatile. Roasted, stewed, mashed, even pickled. They were used to stretch meals and to fill out porridge when grain supplies ran low. They were grown in colder regions of the empire and could thrive in unimpressive soil, making them a staple for both rural farmers and struggling city dwellers. And awkwardly for the senators, they were also associated with the lower classes, yet somehow that only made them more political. You remember reading an odd little tract from a Roman doctor, Scribonius Largus perhaps, who swore that turnips when boiled properly could reduce swelling, ward off melancholy, and even encourage, shall we say, vigorous nighttime activity. So now imagine, one man's turnip is a health food, another's peasant dish, and another's aphrodisiac. You can see why opinions might diverge. The wealthy classes had a complicated relationship with vegetables in general. On the one hand, they consumed them daily, particularly in dishes dressed up with garum vinegar and herbs. On the other hand, raw or plain vegetables were often dismissed as cibus vilis, low food, the kind of thing you fed to servants or monks or philosophical weirdos in sandals. But every now and then, vegetables would swing back into fashion among the elite. It became stylish to have simple tastes. A senator might proudly host a banquet where only roots and lentils were served, followed, of course, by 7 types of honeyed pastries and a few quails stuffed with dates. Historians still argue whether this fashion for simplicity was authentic or just another performance of virtue. You suspect the latter. After all, nothing says humble like announcing to 40 guests that you're serving peasant soup from a golden ladle. Even emperors played this game. It's said that Augustus himself preferred a modest diet bread, cheese, and fruit, and once claimed that he would rather eat turnips than peacock. Though given Augustus's knack for propaganda, he may have said that while biting into a slice of imported Iberian ham. And yet, vegetables remained a marker of virtue. Cicero, during one of his endless scroll-length speeches, wrote that eating vegetables with no seasoning was an expression of republican frugality. You wonder if he said that before or after someone caught him nibbling dates wrapped in boar fat. In truth, Roman dining was a constant negotiation between image and appetite. Everyone wanted to seem restrained, but not boring, cultured, but not effete, practical, but not poor. And so even the humblest turnip could become a tool in the performance. And if you were a senator with an estate to run, an image to manage, turnips became a currency of clout. You recall an amusing case from Pliny, the Elder's Natural History. He describes a man who grew a turnip the size of a small jug. He sent it as a gift to a magistrate, hoping to win favor, or maybe just to show off his soil. The story doesn't say what happened to the turnip. One assumes it wasn't eaten. Perhaps it was paraded around like a sacred calf. So yes, vegetables mattered, not just as food, but as a display. And that brings us back to the Senate, where the turnip debate has now spiraled into a larger discussion about food and Roman identity. Senator Cotta, thin as a reed and known for quoting Virgil at inappropriate moments, speaks now. If we lose touch with the simple foods of our ancestors, he intones, we lose Rome itself, which is rich, coming from a man whose last banquet included ostrich tongues poached in almond milk. But he's not alone in his sentiment. You can feel it ripple through the chamber. A nostalgic wave. A yearning for some mythical past where Romans were hardy, stoic, and satisfied with boiled roots, even if that past never really existed. One senator rises and declares, let the Greeks have their olives and cheeses. Let the Egyptians have their onions. The Roman eats the earth. The Roman eats turnips. You think he means this metaphorically. You hope he does. Still, this odd passion reveals something deeper. Rome is changing. Imports are increasing. Tastes are diversifying. And some of these men fear that a change in diet is a change in destiny. The joke, of course, is that Roman cuisine was always a mosaic of borrowed tastes. They adapted Etruscan, Greek, Carthaginian, and Gallic flavors long before any of these senators were born. But facts rarely stand in the way of tradition. As the Senate breaks for the midday meal, some eating figs from silver trays, others chewing stale flatbread. You walk out into the forum, warmed by the sun and tickled by the thought that somewhere someone is absolutely furious about tubers. And somehow, that's Rome. As you step out into the forum, your sandals scuff against sun-warmed stones. The crowd is beginning to thicken. Vendors hawking hot chickpea stew, magistrates striding with assistants in tow, and children chasing each other around the base of a weathered statue of Ceres, the goddess of grain. You can still hear echoes of the Senate's vegetable lament trailing behind you like smoke from a poorly stoked brazier. But here in the streets, the stakes feel different. You spot a long line snaking around a bakery near the Sabura district. The air smells of flour, sweat, and worry. It's not just turnips people are anxious about, it's all food. And behind that anxiety survival, you lean on a shaded column scribbling notes. One woman holding a basket of wilted greens catches your eye and shrugs. 3 days ago, these cost 1, as she mutters. Today, 5. That's not just inflation. That's desperation. The poor, especially Rome's enormous population of urban plebeians, live day to day. Their diets rely on the state-subsidized grain dole, but those rations don't cover everything. Vegetables, oil, salt, the occasional hunk of cheese, all must be bought or bartered for. When prices rise, they feel it first. And when they feel it, things get loud. You've heard stories. A few months ago, a market stall selling overpriced lentils was overturned by a mob of laundresses and dockhands. A week later, there was a minor riot outside a fish vendor's cart after rumors spread that he was watering down garum. Historians still argue whether these episodes were spontaneous or cleverly manipulated by political rivals trying to stir unrest. The truth? Probably both. Back in the day, the Gracchi brothers Tiberius and Gaius tried to address this imbalance. They pushed for land reform, food distribution, and representation for the underfed. Both ended up dead. One tossed into the Tiber. The message was clear: feed the poor, but don't empower them too much. Since then, the annona, the Roman grain dole, has become a pillar of policy. But vegetables, they sit just outside the reach of subsidy. That's why they're so volatile. Turnips might seem boring, but to a hungry family, they mean stew belly warmth and a night without pangs. As you walk deeper into the Subura, you notice more signs of strain. A baker argues with a soldier over the size of a loaf. A mother haggles furiously over wilted leeks. An old man mutters about barbarian farmers charging patrician prices. The Subura is noisy, smelly, chaotic, and incredibly alive. It's a district where brick buildings rise in mismatched tiers, laundry flaps from high balconies, and chickens roam like they own the place. And here, more than anywhere, you understand, food isn't abstract. It's immediate. It's the difference between peace and panic. Suddenly, a boy runs past you, shouting "fight" at the bean cart. You follow the crowd. It's not much of a fight, just two vendors slapping at each other with bunches of herbs, but the crowd is enjoying it anyway. There's tension in the air. Everyone's looking for someone to blame. And that's the dangerous thing about food prices. They don't just upset stomachs. They upend social contracts. When the people feel like they've been cheated or ignored, they lash out. Not just at merchants, but at the system, at senators, at the idea that some feast while others fast. You think back to Flavius's speech. Beneath the bluster was a real fear that if the Senate didn't regulate prices, someone else would. Someone with fewer togas and more knives. The Roman state knew this too. That's why emperors like Augustus and Trajan invested so heavily in food distribution. They built massive grain storage facilities, the Heraea, and ensured steady shipments from Egypt. They even created a fleet just to carry grain across the Mediterranean. But vegetables, those remained in private hands. It was easier to blame greedy vendors than to admit structural failure. You sit on a broken column and watch the people pass. They're not thinking about Senate debates. They're thinking about dinner. A young girl passes with a single carrot in her hand, grinning as though it's a ruby. A soldier bites into a raw onion with the grim satisfaction of someone who's eaten worse. An old woman is bartering scraps of cloth for a basket of greens, her voice both sharp and strangely hopeful. You take it all in, and slowly a bigger picture forms. Turnips are just the symbol. What's at stake is the entire question of who gets to eat well and who doesn't. And in a city built on conquest, the biggest challenge isn't winning wars, it's feeding the peace. Back in the Forum, the senators are still debating, still trading barbed words under marble archways. But here in the Subura, the stakes are simpler and much more urgent. The price of turnips isn't just a matter of economic policy, it's a spark in a dry field, and the wind is picking up. Back in the heart of Rome's elite neighborhoods, far from the clamoring of the Subura, things are quieter but not necessarily less ridiculous. Here, the marble courtyards of patrician villas host private banquets where nobles lounge on couches, eat with their fingers, and debate the finer points of salad composition with the gravitas of military tacticians. You're standing just beyond the threshold of one such atrium, pretending to fuss with your scrolls. It's a dinner hosted by Senator Gnaeus Cornelius, an older man whose reputation rests equally on his military service and his collection of decorative olive spoons. A platter of carefully arranged vegetables is passed down the reclining line of guests. Someone makes a comment, half joke, half flex about the turnips being pre-famine vintage. Chuckles all around. And that's when you realize even vegetables, when served here, have become a kind of performance. A dish of sliced beets appears next, garnished with a whisper of vinegar and crushed coriander. It's announced dramatically as the same recipe Apicius served Caesar Augustus. Someone raises an eyebrow. Authentic, allegedly, the host replies. Found it on a wax tablet in Baiae. You stifle a laugh. Even here, where bellies are full and the cushions are imported from Syria, turnips have made their way into the conversation, not as a necessity, but as nostalgia, a rustic flourish to complement wine that costs more than a legionary's monthly pay. Vegetables, you see, have climbed the social ladder. There was a time when to be seen eating turnips or lentils or cabbage was a mark of poverty. Now, paradoxically, it's become a way for the elite to seem humble. A safe flirtation with simplicity. Like wearing homespun wool for fashion, not necessity. This performance of rusticity has roots, pun intended. Even in the late Republic, Stoics and Epicureans promoted modest diets as a virtue. To abstain from excess was to control the self to be truly Roman. But in practice, such modesty was carefully curated. Senators would serve boiled carrots with truffle shavings, leeks in saffron broth, lentil soup topped with imported peppercorns from India. It was restraint wrapped in decadence humility with a price tag. Historians still argue whether these elite trends helped or hurt the poor. On one hand, noble interest in vegetables increased demand-spurring production. On the other, it drove up prices and turned simple staples into luxury items. You overhear two guests comparing their vegetable estates as if they were vineyards. I've started growing parsnips, one boasts. They're difficult, but the yield this year superb. Oh, I've transitioned to heirloom turnips, the other replies. Much sweeter. Practically divine when roasted. Heirloom turnips. You roll your eyes internally. Somehow the same root that sparked a shouting match in the Senate now graces elite tables as a delicacy. Senator Gnaeus raises his goblet. To simplicity, he toasts as slaves enter with honey-soaked figs and toasted almond cakes. You sip water from a chipped cup and wonder how the plebs would feel hearing that. The truth is, the elite of Rome had a knack for appropriating poverty. Rough clothing, simple food manual labor, all of it could become fashionable, so long as it was temporary and optional. Cato, the elder centuries earlier, made a reputation for wearing old togas and eating cabbage on purpose. He claimed it kept him healthy and close to the land. His enemies claimed he just liked the attention. Senator Gnaeus now recounts the story of Scipio Aemilianus, who once rejected a 10-course feast in favor of a plate of radishes and a crust of bread. The moral, apparently, is that restraint builds empire. Of course, Scipio also ordered the complete destruction of Carthage, so perhaps we shouldn't take our dietary advice from generals, but that's Rome for you. Everything has a symbolic double meaning. A vegetable isn't just a vegetable. It's a philosophy, a political position, a status symbol. Even something as humble as a turnip can end up discussed in marble halls under the watchful gaze of imported Greek statues. You glance down at your notes. The contradictions write themselves. Poor people eat turnips because they have no choice. Rich people eat turnips to appear virtuous. The middle class just wants to get through dinner without going broke. Somewhere a slave clears the remains of a carrot soufflé, and a senator begins a short, impassioned poem about fennel. You decide it's time to leave before dessert turns into a metaphor. As you step back into the cool evening air, you realize something: this whole city is a stage. From the slums to the Senate, from muddy farms to candlelit villas, everyone's performing Rome in their own way, even if they're doing it with vegetables. The sun dips low over the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the tiled rooftops and smoky chimneys of Roman countryside estates. You've left the city behind now, traveling with a caravan of scribes officials and disgruntled senators out to inspect the agricultural backbone of the empire, the Roman villa. Not the opulent sort with mosaic floors and swimming pools, but the working kind, a sprawling estate where turnips don't start political debates, they end up in stew pots. As your mule cart bumps along the worn dirt road, you pass fields of wheat grapevines coiling like lazy serpents along low trellises, and yes, neatly arranged rows of root vegetables. Turnips. So many turnips, some pale and knobby, others purple tinged and firm, glinting with the residue of the afternoon's irrigation. You arrive at Villa Hortensia, an estate owned by a minor senator who inherited more land than sense. He greets the entourage with a forced smile and the posture of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Welcome to the breadbasket of Rome, he says, gesturing toward a field where slaves bend under the sun harvesting beets. Someone coughs. No one laughs. The senator begins a tour showing off his granaries, his press house, and most importantly, his hortus, a vast vegetable garden flanked by clay irrigation channels and low stone borders. You trail behind, observing more than speaking. The smell of moist soil fills your nostrils. The buzzing of insects mingles with the rhythmic schlick-schlick of sickles slicing stalks. Workers sweat and move with quiet efficiency, some barely older than you. The villa's overseer, a severe-looking freedman named Lardius, explains the operation. 3 plots rotated. 1 rests each season. Chickpeas over there. Lettuces and leeks along the northern wall. Turnips, of course, near the drainage. Why near the drainage, you ask, genuinely curious. Turnips love damp roots. He replies, not looking at you. Hate the heat. Same as politicians. You make a note of that one. What strikes you most isn't just the scale of the operation, but the organization. Roman agricultural methods were surprisingly advanced: crop rotation, irrigation, seasonal planning. And behind it all, people, enslaved, contracted, or desperately poor, but essential. Historians still argue whether these villas were efficient economic engines or bloated vanity projects subsidized by imperial privilege. But one thing is clear: without them, the Roman food chain would collapse. And here's the awkward part. Many senators screaming about turnip prices back in Rome own places like this. They're not just lawmakers, they're landowners, suppliers, and in many cases, price setters. The Senate debates how expensive vegetables are while simultaneously profiting from the supply. It's a closed loop, and the squeeze is always felt by the same next laborers and eaters. The ones who plant and the ones who buy. Senator Petronius, who insisted on coming along for educational purposes, is now standing by a row of cabbages, holding one up like it's a sea urchin. They're heavier than they look, he says, proud of his insight. You wonder how many of these men have ever tried planting anything more delicate than a political scheme. Later, over a modest dinner of boiled lentils and roasted root vegetables, the senators eat with hesitant curiosity. Someone compliments the freshness of the turnips. Someone else jokes that they're cheaper out here. You chew slowly, noticing how different they taste in context. Not a symbol. Just food. Grown, pulled, rinsed, and served without politics, or at least without marble walls echoing the debate. Lardius returns with a clay tablet ledger showing the year's output. It's efficient, meticulous, and alarmingly profitable. Petronius squints at the numbers. So, the price spike. Lartius shrugs. Weather's been strange. Oxen prices are up. Wages too. Then there's storage fees, transportation, bribes for market placement. You want cheap turnips, you'll have to grow them yourself. No reply, just the sound of spoons scraping clay bowls. Out here, things make more sense. Food costs what it costs. No one's pretending to be virtuous or poor. Everyone knows their role. The fields demand it. As you step outside after the meal, the stars begin to push through the dusk. The fields rustle softly in the breeze, and the distant hoot of an owl floats through the night. You sit on a stone wall looking out over the turnip rows, and it hits you. This is the foundation of everything. Not the speeches, not the parades, not even the amphitheaters, just dirt, sweat, and tubers. Rome rises and falls on its vegetables. It always has. The next morning, you're back on the road, your cart rattling lazily past olive groves and donkey caravans, returning to Rome with more dirt on your sandals than you left with. As the city skyline slowly returns with its domes and smokestacks, you can't stop thinking about something Lartius said the night before. You want cheap turnips? Grow them yourself. That phrase echoes in your ears all the way back to the Senate, where things are once again getting heated, though not necessarily enlightened. You slip into the gallery just in time to witness Senator Gallus waving around a sprig of wild fennel like a general wielding a baton. He's not here for nuance. He's here to yell. "Do you know what I saw yesterday?" he shouts. "A man, an honest Roman, haggling with a butcher over radishes." He offered his belt in trade. His belt. A few senators gasp, others smirk. One elderly man in the corner murmurs, "Was it a good belt?" But Gallus isn't finished. We're failing the people, he proclaims. They cannot afford vegetables, and we noble senators grow them. Do you see the contradiction? Several senators glance uncomfortably at one another. The contradiction is glaring. Rome's lawmakers are also its suppliers. They argue over prices by day and count profits by night. There's no separation between agriculture and authority. Their sandals are covered in mud even if they pretend it's marble dust. Senator Cassianus stands slowly brushing off his robe. Let us not exaggerate. We are men of the land, yes, but our farms feed Rome. They keep the system balanced. Balanced, Gallus scoffs. The baker's daughter fainted in the market last week. That's your balance. And so it begins again. The argument over food, over fairness, over whether being a landowner and a legislator is a conflict of interest or simply efficient synergy, as Senator Petronius puts it with a proud little smile. You jot that down. Efficient synergy. It'll make a good punchline one day. Here's the thing, many senators do own land. A lot of it. Large swaths of central Italy, and in some cases estates stretching all the way to Hispania or North Africa. These latifundia are managed by stewards worked by slaves or tenant farmers and constantly pushing for higher yields and fatter profits. And because these senators also pass the laws, they're able to protect those profits in subtle ways. A tax incentive here, a grain subsidy that favors wheat over roots, an import tariff waived just in time for their ship to arrive. Historians still argue whether this agricultural oligarchy caused long-term economic decline or merely reflected Rome's natural growth. But it's undeniable the people setting the rules had dirt under their fingernails and coin in their pockets. What makes the turnip debate particularly spicy is that vegetables, unlike grain, weren't centrally regulated. They weren't part of the Annona Rome's official grain distribution system. That meant no state oversight, no rationing, no guaranteed supply, which made them vulnerable and profitable. Back in the Senate, things are spiraling. Senator Aurelia, usually the voice of reason, raises her hand. Perhaps it's time we recuse ourselves. Create a council of neutral citizens to oversee food pricing. Neutral Flavius laughs bitterly. In Rome. Who's neutral? The laundress who rents from my cousin? The baker whose son works my stables? He has a point. Even neutrality is a luxury few can afford. But Aurelia presses on. We cannot legislate prices and profit from them at the same time. The people see this. They are not blind. The chamber quiets for a beat. You can feel the tension shift. There it is, that tiny crack in the marble. The suggestion that maybe, just maybe, Rome's greatness has bred a bit too much convenience. And then, predictably, someone ruins the moment. Petronius rises. I suggest a compromise, he says, ever the negotiator. We form a Senate Vegetable Commission, a board to study root price fluctuations, gather data, investigate causes, report quarterly. You stare at him. A vegetable committee. You write it down just to prove it happened. To your amazement, the idea gains traction. Senators nod glad to kick the turnip down the road, so to speak. Action through inaction. Rome's favorite hobby, but Gallus isn't satisfied. He slams his palm on the bench. We are living in luxury while the poor barter for onions. Are we Romans or parasites on our own empire? Strong words. And they hit harder than most. You look around and see faces tightening. A few fists clenching. Not out of rage, but out of guilt, maybe. That's the uncomfortable truth in the room. These men aren't evil. Many sincerely believe they're serving Rome. But belief doesn't boil a turnip. Outside the forum thrums with life. Merchants haggle. Beggars plead. Bakers shout their wares with increasingly forced cheer. And inside, a vegetable becomes a mirror reflecting everything Rome doesn't want to see. The Vegetable Commission is barely a day old before it stumbles into its first dilemma: taxation. Not the big sweeping imperial kind, but the dull, relentless drip of local market taxes that somehow always land hardest on the ones pushing turnip carts through crowded alleys. You're seated quietly in the back of a smaller chamber. A semicircle of senators fanning themselves with wax tablets as a provincial tax official from Campania nervously clears his throat. The issue, noble sirs, he says, is that in order to transport vegetables into Rome, vendors must pay fees at multiple checkpoints. Each toll adds a fraction. Fractions add up. He's right. Between entry taxes, stall rents, sanitation bribes, and unofficial friendship fees. To dock workers and guards, a crate of vegetables can double in price by the time it reaches the forum. But that's the cost of doing business, replies Senator Cassianus, adjusting his rings. Rome must fund its aqueducts, its roads, its security. By taxing turnips, Senator Gallus snaps. Would you prefer we tax marble statues? Petronius chimes in, ever the realist. Because I assure you, those don't grow underground. You smile at the jab, but the taxman's face is deadly serious. The market is cracking, he warns. Vendors are hiding inventory. Farmers are selling to smugglers. People are skipping the forum, entirely preferring back alley trades. We are losing revenue and worse, control. And there it is. Control. In Rome, taxation wasn't just about money. It was about hierarchy. Who pays, who profits, who passes unnoticed. Grain had long been part of a tightly controlled system, and wine, oil, and salt all had their own regulations, but vegetables had been left to dance freely. Now they're causing a headache. Some senators suggest fixed prices, but that raises alarms. Price caps lead to hoarding shortages, resentment. Others propose a turnip tariff exemption just for the winter, someone insists. But the moment exemptions start, the entire tax code begins to leak like a cracked amphora. One senator, whose name you don't know, but whose voice drips with disdain, suggests simply importing more vegetables from Egypt. Why grow here when the Nile gives us better produce, cheaper, that stirs up a storm? Senator Aurelia slaps her palm on the marble armrest. We're Romans, she snaps. We don't eat foreign dirt. We grow our own. Which is a funny statement, considering most Roman wheat does come from Egypt, but the sentiment hits hard. Suddenly, the room is divided not just by economic theory, but by identity. Should Rome rely on her provinces for food, or should she preserve the sanctity of domestic soil? Historians still argue whether these debates had real cultural weight, or were just nationalistic theater. But in this moment, they're very real. Senator Flavius, ever the traditionalist, launches into a poetic tirade about the Roman farmer stooped in virtue, sowing the seed of empire beneath his sandals. You resist the urge to yawn. Another senator mutters, pretty speech. Never farmed a day in his life. And yet, there's truth in all of it. Rome does depend on her provinces, and Rome does mythologize the idea of homegrown virtue. These contradictions live side by side, just like imported grapes and local olives on a nobleman's table. You glance down at your notes, drawing a little turnip next to a list of rising import prices. If the Senate removes vegetable taxes, entirely domestic. Farmers suffer. If they keep them, city dwellers riot. And if they rely on imports, they open themselves to food diplomacy, trade deals wrapped in vines and roots. In the margins, you jot turnips are now geopolitical. Outside news is spreading that some vendors have started growing small rooftop gardens illegal, but brilliant. Cabbages in clay pots, beets in amphorae cut in half, even carrots in grain sacks suspended from rafters. People adapt. They always do. But the Senate hates improvisation. It threatens control. If everyone starts growing their own food, who needs taxes? Who needs vendors? Who needs them? You begin to understand the deeper panic beneath these debates. It's not just that prices are rising. It's that the empire's careful system of hierarchy, senators on top, producers below, consumers even lower, is starting to wobble. Rome is a machine, an elegant, overbuilt, temperamental machine, and something as small as a vegetable tax can make the gears grind. At the end of the meeting, no decision is reached, as usual. But as the senators file out, the murmurs are darker. The humor is fading. Senator Varro whispers to another, "What if they stop buying altogether?" What the plebs? The other replies, "They'll always eat. They have to? You're not so sure. In times of pressure, people innovate. Barter returns. Backyard gardens bloom. Tiny black markets pulse behind bakeries and beneath stairwells. And if the people stop depending on the market, the Senate loses more than coin. It loses relevance. You awaken to the sound of shouting. Not the dignified kind from Senate chambers, but raw echoing chaos boots on stone clattering carts, the high-pitched wail of a vendor's daughter screaming for her father. You throw on your cloak and rush out toward the Subura. The smell hits first smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of trampled vegetables. You push through a crowd, hearts thudding in unison, and see the cause of the panic, a small riot outside the Metellum, the central market. And it all started, they say, with a turnip. You piece it together from the yelling, a young vendor, no more than 16, had been caught selling root vegetables at double the usual rate. A soldier back from guard duty, and already short on coin, objected. Harsh words turned to shoves. Shoves turned to fists. Someone threw a basket. And then the crowd lit the fuse. Now baskets are overturned. A stall is in flames. A pair of soldiers try to push back the mob, but they're outnumbered. Turnips of all things fly through the air like earthen missiles. You duck instinctively as a particularly large one whizzes past your head. It hits a marble column with a dull thwack, exploding in a satisfying splatter. Somewhere a senator is probably composing a very serious speech about vegetable-based unrest. You crouch behind an overturned crate, taking notes furiously. This isn't just random anger. It's a pressure valve bursting. The people are tired of paying more for less. Tired of being told their hunger is a logistical inconvenience. Tired of hearing about commissions and scrolls while their stomachs gurgle and their pockets rattle. Historians still debate whether this specific riot was planned or spontaneous. Some argue a radical populist group called the Radix Yes, literally the root, helped stir things up. Others think it was just bad luck, a warm day, and too many hungry bellies. But it was real, and it got messy. You watch as a patrician tries to sneak away his fine robe, now decorated with beet juice and what might be celery leaves. A child pelts him with a carrot, giggling. A fishmonger climbs onto a barrel and shouts, "No more stolen stews. Fair prices or no prices." That becomes the chant. Over and over. Fair prices or no prices. You write it down. Eventually, the cohorts urbani arrive, the city's pseudo-police force, and begin to restore order. Not kindly. One vendor is dragged away by his collar, protesting that he never raised prices, just trimmed his onions less. The crowd disperses slowly, muttering, bruised, but not broken. The tension remains like steam above a cooling pot. You walk the aisles of wreckage. turnips everywhere. Split-stomped, some still clutched tightly in the hands of fallen baskets. You pick one up. It's soft, overripe, and oddly symbolic. Later in a bathhouse, two merchants retell the story with flair. "Did you see the senator running like a chicken? I heard someone threw a leak at the magistrate. They should have thrown the whole market at him." Word spreads quickly. By evening, the entire city is buzzing. The Senate is in session. Emergency, this emergency, and the that. But the truth is, they're out of step. They talk of legislation, of fines and inspections, of regulating storage, but they don't talk about why the people are angry. They don't talk about the boy who hadn't eaten in 2 days. They don't talk about the grandmother who pawned her last ring for a basket of greens. Instead, they call it disturbance of the peace, as if peace was ever really present. In the chambers, Senator Aurelia makes a plea. We need real reform, she says. Not speeches, not scrolls. A cap on vegetable prices, emergency relief, direct communication with the markets. Flavius, of course, nearly chokes on his own outrage. You would dismantle the free market over a handful of tubers? No, she replies calmly. I would save the Republic from tripping over its own vegetables. You want to applaud. You don't. Petronius suggests a citywide vegetable holiday. A symbolic gesture, he says. A week of discounted food to restore goodwill. Everyone ignores him. Still something shifts. There's blood in the water, or rather beet juice on the floor, and the senators know it. The riot has done what speeches could not. It's made turnips unignorable. That night, as the city cools and the vendors rebuild their stalls, you pass a wall freshly painted with graffiti. We eat roots, and you root for gold. The message is rough, the paint still wet, but it sticks in your mind. Because today the people didn't just fight for food. They fought to be seen. And Rome, whether it wants to or not, will have to look. You wake up the next morning to an unexpected calm. Birdsong over the rooftops. Merchants setting up their stalls with cautious movements. A few senators emerging from their domus earlier than usual, their sandals cleaner than you'd expect after yesterday's riot. You stretch, gather your things, and make your way toward the Temple of Concord, where today's Senate meeting promises to be philosophical. The first clue is the presence of Marcus Crispus, a well-known Stoic philosopher draped in simple wool and carrying only a small clay cup of water. You've seen him before walking barefoot through the forum, like it's a personal test of endurance. Today, he's been invited to address the Senate. You take your spot on the edge of the gallery just as Marcus begins. He does not raise his voice. The turnip, he says, is a mirror. Several senators blink. It does not strive to be more than it is. He continues, nor does it envy the grape or the olive. It grows quietly. It nourishes without ambition. It teaches us sufficiency. You glance down. Petronius is mouthing sufficiency like he's never heard it in a sentence before. Marcus strolls slowly through the chamber. We are not angry at turnips. We are angry at hunger, at fear, at the weight of things beyond our control. But the turnip is blameless. You suppress a laugh. Somewhere a beet vendor just became a prophet. Flavius grumbles something about Greek nonsense, but Aurelia signals for silence. She's intrigued. Marcus continues. To eat with modesty is to live with clarity. To understand the cycle of harvest is to understand the cycle of empire. That which swells must eventually soften. That which grows must return to the soil. It's beautiful. Also completely unhelpful to the vendors whose stalls were trampled yesterday. Still, you sense that Marcus has hit a nerve not because he's offering solutions, but because he's reminding the Senate that their panic isn't new. Rome has always lived on the edge of scarcity and abundance. This turnip problem is just the latest flare in an eternal dance between hunger and power. Historians still argue whether Marcus Crispus actually spoke in the Senate that day, or whether the account is an invention by later Stoic scribes to lend their movement some early political street cred. But whether it happened or not, the story endured. A philosopher in threadbare robes lecturing the empire's elite about root vegetables. The absurdity made it memorable. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. After Marcus finishes, Senator Cotta mutters, "The last thing we need is more philosophy." Next, they'll be asking vegetables how they feel. Would still get more sense from them than some senators, Gallus replies. The meeting breaks into factions again. One group wants more price regulation. One wants stricter punishment for market unrest. A third, led by a young senator named Piso, wants to establish a network of civic gardens where citizens can grow their own food under state supervision. You make a note. Piso for parsnip reform has a nice campaign ring to it. Petronius, as always, tries to split the difference. Perhaps we commission a series of pamphlets, he says, on proper vegetable behavior. Something educational. No one responds. And then quietly, Marcus speaks once more. You cannot fix hunger with scrolls, he says. You must first understand it. The chamber falls into an uneasy silence. It's the kind of line that echoes long after the speaker leaves. And leave he does. No formal farewell. Just a quiet nod and the sound of his sandals slipping down marble steps. Later that afternoon, you find yourself sitting near a vendor cart, scribbling your notes while eating a lukewarm turnip pasty. Across from you, a child is drawing a crooked face into a real turnip and pretending it's a senator. You hear him shout, "I vote no," before flicking it into a bucket. You smile. Despite everything, Rome continues. The Senate argues. Philosophers lecture. Turnips are trampled and toasted. But the deeper truth buried just below the soil is that every empire, no matter how mighty, depends on the humblest things to survive. Food, fairness, listening, and perhaps just maybe a moment of reflection over stew. By now, the turnip debacle has outgrown itself. It's no longer just a market issue. It's become a matter of Roman pride. This morning you find yourself at a Senate session turned sour, not over price ceilings or philosophy, but produce origins. Senator Severinus, broad-shouldered and fond of shouting, has come armed with a new accusation. Our vegetables, he declares, pounding his fist into his palm, are no longer Roman. You blink. Here we go. According to Severinus, imported vegetables from Gaul, from Africa, even from Britannia, have begun to flood the markets. And worse, they're cheaper, bigger, tasteless, he claims, but dangerous all the same. The chamber groans. He holds up a pale, oversized turnip, like it's evidence in a trial. Grown in Gallic soil, carried across the Alps, sold beside our noble roots. You resist the urge to ask whether he means literal roots or metaphorical ones. The debate that follows is unlike the others. It isn't about price or hunger or even class. It's about identity. What does it mean for a Roman to eat a non-Roman vegetable? The irony is thick enough to smear on bread. Rome is an empire built on conquest and import. Spices from India, silks from China, grain from Egypt. And yet, this vegetable fear-mongering finds traction. Historians still argue whether this moment reflects the first stirrings of Roman nativism or was simply a convenient distraction from policy failure. But either way, the rhetoric becomes emotional. Senator Aurelia pushes back. Do we question the citizenship of a man born in Numidia if he serves Rome? Why then question the cabbage that grows in Iberia? She has a point. The empire is vast. Its strength has always been its diversity. But her words don't land with everyone. Flavius pipes up. A Roman tongue should not be fed by foreign hands. Petronius, who seems to be trying very hard not to roll his eyes, finally interjects with a rare burst of sarcasm. Tell that to the wine you drank last night, he says. From Narbo Martius, wasn't it? Or was that too barbarian for your palate? The chamber stifles laughter. Even you smirk. Still, there's no denying a creeping anxiety in the room. Imports bring complexity, and complexity breeds paranoia. If foreign vegetables can undercut local ones, what's next? Foreign merchants, foreign ideas, foreign senators. The worry simmers just beneath the debate, like a pot left too long over flame. Outside the Senate, this conversation has already reached the streets. You pass a vendor stall with a new hand-painted sign, locally grown only, pure Roman soil. A few stalls down, a man is offering imported leeks at a discount quietly. His cart is half covered, like he's smuggling contraband, not vegetables. This new vegetable patriotism is spreading quickly, and oddly. One woman proudly tells you she walked an extra half-mile just to buy true Sabine turnips. Another refuses to touch anything labeled from Gaul. They bathe in rivers, she whispers, as if it's a dietary warning. Back in the Senate, Senator Gallus' usually fire and fury surprises everyone. I don't care where the vegetable is from, he says, as long as no one's trying to sell me a beet with an accent. You don't know whether to laugh or groan. Senator Vero makes a quieter point. Imports stabilize prices. Without Gaulish crops, we'd have famine every other year. This debate is rooted more in fear than fact. But fear is sticky. It clings to ideas and spreads through alleys and public baths. You hear it later that evening, murmured through a tepid caldarium. Rome's soul is in her soil. And then, as if on cue, did you hear they're feeding senators carrots from Egypt? A bather gasps. It's almost comical, if not for the underlying tension. Because beneath all this is something serious: Rome's growing discomfort with its own size, with its borders, its imports, its entangled systems. The vegetable question is just the latest leaf on a very old laurel tree. You jot a note to yourself. When turnips have passports, the empire is nervous. Outside the Senate walls, a group of young men gather in tunics, dyed with walnut husks, the new color of pure Roman markets. They chant something about roots from home. You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. This movement, though still small, is beginning to matter. And while the Senate argues over soil, the vendors just want stable prices. The poor just want to eat, and the vegetables quietly just keep growing wherever they're planted. You would think that after riots, philosophical speeches, and accusations of foreign tubers infiltrating Roman bowls, the situation might calm down. But then the emperor finds out. Word spreads fast, first through whispers in bathhouses, then through scrolls carried by fleet-footed messengers. The turnip crisis has reached the Palatine. You don't see him, of course. No one sees the emperor without 6 layers of protocol and a bribe to the right chamberlain. But by midday, a formal decree is being read aloud on the steps of the Curia. You wedge yourself into the crowd. A tall man in military red clears his throat and begins, in light of recent unrest and the Honorable Senate's impassioned deliberations. His Imperial Majesty, Marcus Claudius Maximus, decrees the following. The crowd leans in. 1. All staple vegetables, including, but not limited to turnips, beets, carrots, leeks, onions, and cabbage, shall have temporary market caps imposed in the city of Rome. A few gasps. A woman next to you whispers, "He said leeks, too. Thank the gods." 2. A delegation of senatorial and civic representatives shall be appointed to oversee fair distribution and pricing enforcement. Petronius, standing nearby, looks alarmed. "Oh no," he mutters. "They want me to count carrots, don't they?" 3. To preserve the health of Rome's agricultural traditions, incentives shall be provided to domestic growers who supply the city directly. Ah, the compromise clause. Good for farmers, good for optics. 4. All imported produce must now bear proper origin labeling for the sake of transparency and consumer confidence. So, Severinus gets his patriotic stickers after all. 5. Any further civil unrest tied to market activity shall be treated as sedition and punished accordingly. And there it is. The carrot, the stick, and the branding label all in one scroll. Historians still debate whether the emperor genuinely cared about vegetable pricing or whether this was a calculated move to appear in touch while tightening his grip. Either way, it's a turning point. Back inside the Senate, there's a mixture of relief and panic. Relief because any action has been taken. Panic because now someone actually has to enforce it. Petronius is indeed selected for the oversight board, much to his dismay. I studied Cicero for this, he groans. Not celery. Flavius, meanwhile, is suspiciously quiet. Maybe because the decree subtly undercuts his position. Price caps mean regulation, and regulation means less room to rail about free markets. Senator Aurelia, to her credit, seems satisfied. The people will eat tonight, she says simply. But not everyone is thrilled. A group of market vendors is now grumbling that price caps don't account for spoilage theft or rat interference, a term you find oddly specific. One trader even claims he lost 3 turnips and a sleeping cat to rodent invasion. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. In the meantime, imperial inspectors, recognizable by their polished bronze badges and clipboards, begin making rounds in the markets. You follow one as he lifts. Baskets asks, prices sniffs for freshness. A man with the authority to confiscate parsnips and issue fines for overpriced onions. Rome never runs out of new job titles. One vendor tries to hide a sack of Gallic turnips under a bench. The inspector stares. Domestic only, he says. These were grown in Etruria, the vendor lies. The inspector raises a brow. Etruria now prints its names in cursive Gaulish script. The turnips are seized. You note the moment. Price controls create a new black market. That's just how Rome works. Control one side of the system, and the other side pops loose like an overcooked amphora lid. But for now, most people seem calmer. The forum is lively again. Laughter returns. Even the street performers are back. One juggles apples and onions while yelling, "I'm a balanced diet." You pass a public fountain where a group of children play Senate and vendor. One child holds a wooden spoon like a gavel. "I declare this cabbage too expensive," he yells. The others cheer. Then they eat the cabbage. Later that evening, the Senate hosts a private reception. Not a full banquet, but enough food to suggest that the crisis hasn't reached their own pantries. You hover near the back, watching them nibble on turnip pastes and small dishes of honeyed carrots. "Not bad," mutters Flavius. "Still prefer figs." Petronius raises a goblet. "To vegetables, may they never rise up against us again." You all laugh. But you wonder. Because the emperor's involvement may have quelled the panic, but it's also confirmed something deeper. Food is power. Not just in the bellies it fills, but in the systems it reveals. When people starve, they rise. When prices rise, so do tempers. And when the emperor responds, it's not because he loves turnips. It's because he fears what happens when the people stop believing Rome can feed them. If Rome has a secret art form, it's propaganda. Statues, slogans, parades, everything is designed to say, all is well, even when nothing is. So it's only fitting that after weeks of turnip-driven panic, the city launches what can only be described as its most unexpected campaign, yet the great vegetable rebranding. You first notice it walking past the Arch of Titus. A fresh mural is being painted beside the gate. Not a god, not a battle scene, no chariots or eagles. It's a turnip, gleaming, centered, with golden rays behind it like the sun. Below it in fine painted script, the root of Rome's strength. You blink, that's new. Soon you start seeing them everywhere. Posters, mosaics, even amphor labels. Nourish the Republic, buy local Rome's soil. Rome's pride, cabbage is citizenship. You're not sure whether to be impressed or deeply confused. Inside the Senate, Petronius is pacing. "Why are there paintings of vegetables in the baths now?" he mutters. "I saw a fresco of a beet reclining on a couch." A beet. Senator Vero sighs. It's the emperor's new initiative. Civic pride through culinary virtue. Or something. They're handing out pins. Adds Aurelia, holding up a tiny bronze badge in the shape of a leek. You can't help it. You laugh. This, apparently, is Rome's idea of morale repair visual vegetables. Historians still argue whether this campaign was a sincere effort to promote food security or just an absurd PR patch on a broken barrel. But its reach is undeniable. Singers in the forum now include lyrics about parsnips in their ballads. Children's rhymes feature heroic carrots. One group of street actors stages a play where a noble turnip rescues a starving senator from financial ruin. The satire becomes too delicious to resist. Soon, a series of parody scrolls begins circulating under the pseudonym Plinius the Pickled. They feature interviews with talking vegetables who complain about Senate inefficiency. Your favorite so far, I am, cabbage, says one, and I've been waiting for a price stabilization policy since the reign of Tiberius. But not everyone is amused. Flavius appears one morning toting a staff carved in the shape of a fennel bulb, not because he likes it, because he's trying to reclaim the narrative. Let no man say I lack appreciation for the humble root, he declares. This staff represents unity. The staff breaks during his speech. He blames sabotage. Meanwhile, across the forum, vendors are cashing in. Now that local has become fashionable prices on anything branded Sabine grown or Etruscan soil certified are quietly inching back up. A turnip with a laurel-stamped wax seal sells for 2 denarii. It's the same turnip you saw last week for half that. And so the loop closes again. Propaganda intended to soothe unrest ends up feeding the same inequality that sparked it. Because even in crisis, Rome knows how to sell itself. You take a walk through the campus marches. A new statue is being erected, this one of a toga-clad man with a sack of vegetables slung over his shoulder. The plaque reads, "To the Roman farmer defender of the Republic." It's meant to inspire pride. You're not sure it doesn't, because beneath the farce there is a truth. The empire is built on agriculture, on labor, on the hands that plant and pull and carry and sell. And maybe just, maybe a statue isn't the worst way to remember that. Later, at a small gathering, Aurelia raises her cup. To the vegetable, she says, which has endured more debate than any consul. Petronius chimes in, and held its shape better too. They all laugh. You look around and realize something else the turnip crisis has done, what no edict or edifice could. It's made the Senate look down below the marble benches beyond the orations into the soil. Not enough to fix everything. Not enough to change the system, but enough to see it. And in Rome, sometimes that's a revolution all by itself. It begins with a missing senator. Not missing in the dramatic sense, no mysterious disappearance, no dagger in the dark intrigue. Just absent. Senator Paulius, known for his vehement stance on vegetable purity and a deep distrust of anything pickled, simply doesn't show up one morning. By noon, his aide reports that he's refusing to participate in any Senate discussions until the chamber ceases its obsession with edible topics. You can't blame him. Even you, now deep in your 14th scroll of turnip-related Senate minutes, are beginning to dream in vegetables. Still, his protest sets off something unexpected. One by one, other senators begin expressing their fatigue. I was elected to negotiate trade deals with the East, grumbles one. And I trained in military law, says another, gesturing at a stack of radish price projections with visible despair. The chamber starts to feel brittle. Even the ever-flamboyant Petronius seems more deflated than usual, stirring honey in his wine, like he's hoping it'll sweeten the week. And then, because Rome never knows when to quit, the final straw arrives. A motion is brought forth to officially designate the turnip as the civic vegetable of Rome. You think it's a joke. You pray it's a joke. It's not a joke. Senator Severinus, who introduced the motion, is dead serious. The turnip represents the Roman soul, hardy, unpretentious, and built for survival. Flavius nods in solemn agreement. Petronius, to his credit, raises a hand. Must we vote on this? Yes, Severinus replies. It is a matter of state pride. And so the Senate, guardians of a vast empire, builders of roads, tamers of provinces, spends half a day debating whether the humble rapa deserves official civic status. You've heard arguments about military reform that went faster. Senator Aurelia, sensing absurdity, tries to inject levity. Can we at least include other vegetables you know for dietary balance? Never, says Flavius. Cabbage lacks moral fiber. You almost choke on your own breath. The vote is chaotic. Some shout, aye, others shout, I can't believe this. A few senators begin dramatically leaving the chamber mid-session, robes flapping like sails in a confused breeze. One flings his stylus across the floor and yells, I came here to legislate, not to join the turnip cult. And with that, the real climax of the crisis begins, not in violence or even protest, but in theatrical burnout. The moment becomes known later in mocking street plays and satirical scrolls as the Great Vegetable Walkout. Nearly half the chamber departs before the vote is called. The rest stay out of pride or stubbornness or boredom. And yes, the motion passes. The turnip is officially Rome's civic vegetable. You can't decide whether to laugh or cry. Outside, the people greet the news with blank stares. One fish vendor shrugs. Will it make them cheaper? No, says his friend. But now they're patriotic. Graffiti appears by nightfall. We are ruled by roots. Let us revolt. Hail Caesar salad. Rome, of course, rolls with it. Bread still bakes. Fish still sizzles. The price of fennel drops. A new musical is staged in the Suburra about a brave turnip who saves the Republic from invading onions. It's surprisingly good. Historians still argue whether the civic vegetable vote was sincere or pure farce. Some claim it was a distraction tactic meant to diffuse tensions. Others see it as the Senate's final surrender to absurdity. But you, having lived every moment of it, suspect it was both. Rome had reached a kind of fever pitch, caught between the weight of empire and the pull of pride. And the turnip absurdly became the sponge that soaked up all that tension. By giving the public something harmless to mock, the Senate bought itself breathing room. A soft landing. A pause. In that sense, perhaps the turnip did what no legislation could. It united the people not through policy, but through shared bewilderment. And in a city like Rome, that's something. You walk home under a sky turning orange, thinking of all the ways power disguises itself, sometimes in gold, sometimes in marble, and sometimes in root vegetables. Days pass. Not with silence. Rome is never silent, but with a new kind of hum, a quieter forum, a Senate that now mercifully discusses other things, military pay, aqueduct repairs, even a proposed poetry tax. Don't ask. But underneath it all, you can still feel it, the turnip echo. It lingers like the scent of garlic in a clay pot. You stroll through the Suburra and notice that the vegetable stalls have returned to something close to normal. Not calm, no market is ever calm, but predictable. Prices have leveled, not dropped, but stabilized. One vendor sees you scribbling and calls out, "No riots today, just spinach." A child nearby sings a tuneless rhyme about civic roots and moral shoots. You can't tell if he's mocking the Senate or quoting their latest mural. You pass a small cart with a sign that reads, "Buy local." Sleep peaceful. And another free turnip with every 3 denarii spent while patriotism lasts. You smile, but the amusement is gentle now, like the aftermath of a family squabble no one wants to bring up again. In the Senate, things are changing too. Slowly, a motion is passed to fund municipal vegetable gardens in poorer districts. Nothing grand, just shared spaces where families can grow greens on rooftops and beside temples. It's small, symbolic, but real. Senator Aurelia oversees the project. Let them grow what they need, she says. It's cheaper than waiting for us to fix it. Petronius is back to writing biting couplets. You hear he's drafting a satire called The Republic of Radishes. Someone offers to perform it with hand puppets. Flavius disapproves. Even Marcus Crispus, the philosopher, reappears one morning to speak softly in the forum, not to the Senate this time, but to a small group of citizens seated on low stones eating boiled lentils. Be like the root, he tells them. Firm in the earth, patient, silent until needed. They nod as though that's enough, and perhaps it is. Historians still puzzle over how serious the turnip crisis really was. Was it a farce, a symptom, a revelation? You know the answer isn't neat. Because it wasn't about turnips. Not really. It was about Rome's reflex to complicate, to posture, to avoid. And eventually, after weeks of shouting and walking out and bad poetry, it found its way to humility. The truth is, empires don't fall from invasions alone. They wobble quietly over simple things. Food, fairness, who gets what, and how much, and why. And in that way, a turnip mattered more than anyone expected, 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 than anyone expected.